Hi, hi Douglas. Today we're going to have a very interesting conversation, I hope. Um, People will know you from many different sources. So you are, your official title is Director of UCD Global, University College Dublin in Ireland.
That's
Um,
right.
you're born in England but based in Australia, and you've moved around and you've spent time in France, and you're a very international person. So people will also know you from the International Education Association of Australia, and
That's
currently
right.
uh, for the European Association for International Education, where you're doing great work editing a whole range of different publications. So I'm really happy to talk to you today, Douglas. We always have great conversations.
Well, thanks, Elspeth. And I know that it'll be hard for us to kind of contain this conversation to 15 minutes. But no, it's a pleasure to join you today. And I suppose part of the focus for me has always been how to bring kind of scholarly research into my practice. I think I worked in international education for many years. I increasingly realized that there was this world of international education research that I didn't necessarily have access to, and gradually moved over time to try and build that into what I was doing. And that led me over time to a wonderful period of work with the International Education Association in Australia and their research committee, and some of the wonderful things that they have been doing there and continue to do. And then more recently, since I moved to Europe 3 and a bit years ago, working now as the chair of the publications committee for the EAIE, the European Association, which again, that association has a large body of members who are practitioners like me. They work in international offices. That's the standard kind of membership of that association, and trying to find a way of bringing new insights for that community on the wonderful work that is being done to analyse and assess international education, around the world.
Yeah, and well, you mentioned the type of membership of EAIE. There are a lot of people who maybe describe themselves or would think of themselves as administrators, as it were. But I know that you've worked a lot on faculty as well, on academics, and looked at the scholar practitioner from an academic perspective. So we've talked about about engaging faculty, and how perhaps our assumptions about the way faculty are engaged is a little bit is not necessarily in line with what we always think. Perhaps you can talk
That's
about
right.
that.
I was really interested in your conversation with Betty Lesk the other day. Betty was referring to the common understanding of a deficit model in relation to international students, and questioning that, as the research has rightly questioned that. But I find it interesting that I think we also operate a kind of deficit model in relation to our academic staff, in that we tend to look at them and think, well, they're not engaging with the international aspects of teaching and learning in the way that we want them to. We talk a lot about, well, some of us talk about faculty engagement. And what we mean by that is really faculty engagement with international education, with the types of things that international offices do, recruiting international students, sending students on exchange. So a very student-focused aspect of the work that universities do. If you look at it from another perspective, and my PhD research several years ago at the University of Melbourne allowed me to do this, you can actually see that academic staff are fundamentally engaged in international aspects of their work, but it's in their research work. Many of them are collaborating internationally in their research, they're co-publishing papers internationally, they're attending international conferences, and yet we don't necessarily associate those activities with internationalization, where they're not part of international education, so they're not part of the work that an international office generally does. And yet, the research that I did was really trying to work out, well, what motivates academic staff to be engaged with the international dimensions of their work. That was my principal avenue of inquiry. Doing that, I also looked at what they were actually doing. And the vast majority of their activities are in the research domain, not in the teaching domain. So the deficit that we might see on the one hand is actually only a deficit from a single perspective.
And I think, I know you've been involved with IEAA, the Australian International Education Association, for a long time, as we've said. I find their model of to recognise faculty engagement in a different way, and to reckon not just faculty engagement with international education, their professional development model, and effectively it's an accreditation model, isn't it? Because you become, and I think you are a senior fellow.
I am, yes.
Yeah.
It's been a fascinating framework to look at, and again, I suppose I'm only jealous that I wasn't in Australia to be able to be part of the team of people putting that together. But I think it is a wonderful framework. It's accessible to people who are not in Australia as well. It is available to members of the association, but I don't think membership is too costly. But the model is fantastic, really kind of pointing to so many different ways in which people, academic or professional staff, can actually identify how they have, secured kind of professional development in international education, whether that be through publishing, whether that be through attending conference, whether it be through activities within their home institution. I found it quite fascinating myself just to read through all of the different categories that were being put forwards in a framework that was kind of created by the association with, I think, strong input from academic staff. The different categories that people can show professional accreditation or professional development in the sphere. I think it's a very strong model, and I imagine it will be adopted by other institutions as well.
I was going to say, because it's great that it's not restricted to just international officers or just faculty or just administrators. It's actually open to anybody from different spheres. And I know you and I have talked about the kind of silos that can, that we're in danger of developing around international education. So do you think something like that could help encourage the discussion across different disciplines or across different parts of the institution?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, again, how do we get academic staff more engaged, is a fundamental question which I ask in my work. And I question, is a professional recognition or accreditation, mechanism that's put forward by a professional association, is that going to be appealing to academic staff? I don't think it necessarily is in the short term, because it doesn't actually respond to their own direct needs. We have to ask ourselves, why do academic staff, why are they engaged in the international aspects of their research? They're engaged in those aspects because it's fundamentally inherent in their own discipline that they engage internationally. There's a promotional value in terms of their faculty promotion process and then rankings and the like. So they get lots of messages that they receive through institutional strategies, for example, that actually the international aspects of research are valuable, whereas I don't think they receive those same messages about the international aspects of teaching and learning. They have people in international offices saying this is valuable, but they're not getting the message from other angles. They're not getting it from institutional. It's not necessarily counted in their promotion. They're not getting it more broadly. Again, as you and I've discussed, those conversations between disciplines are so important, because internationalization in discipline A will look very different to internationalization in discipline B, whether it be for research or whether it be for teaching or whether it be for outreach, and actually recognizing that complexity of how internationalization is realized across the disciplines. There's been lots of work done on this. That is fascinating. I've always been interested in what actually motivates people to become engaged in the various international aspects of their work. And it's not surprising that actually personal kind of experience, were you born overseas, or had you traveled as a child, or had you had a fundamental international experience early in your life, that's likely to lead you to be more engaged in the international aspects of your work later. That's revolutionary as a finding, but it means that, thinking within an institutional context about how to get academic staff more involved, if you can't pull an institutional strategy lever, and if you can't pull a disciplinary lever, and you certainly can't influence whether people had a significant international experience as a child, you've got to then really look at other ways of getting message out. Some of the things that we've been doing at UCD have been about, we've organised a series of global insight seminars where we've brought external speakers, including yourself on more than one occasion, to really just come and get people to think a bit differently, to get them to interrogate what internationalization or global engagement or international education, what do these things actually mean? And I you have to, my sense is that in complex academic environments, you have to engage academic staff from an academic perspective. So trying to actually bring an academic insight or an academic reflection on what internationalisation means is useful.
Mm.
Again, as you and I have discussed, trying to get those seminars out to a broader community is, we see and we have seen.
Yeah.
We have the usual suspects who are very committed and very engaged, who come along and who they already believe the message, they're already doing it. How do we reach others? And again, I don't think we've found solutions to that yet. We just have to keep on looking.
Keep on looking. Now, you've said internationalisation, I don't know how many times so far, and I know you don't like that word, Douglas. So I just wanted to, as a final question, I wanted to ask you about something we've talked about as well, the interpretation of internationalisation or international education that's at institutional level compared with, say, government or regional level. And I know this is something else that you've got an interest in.
That's right. Well, this is dear to my heart. I don't like the word internationalisation. I use it. I use it in our conversations, but I don't use it on my campus. My university refers to global engagement, which again has no clearer definition of what it means. But it is less, maybe, I think internationalisation is a word that distances people because it has the isation suffix, which talks about process and maybe, makes people, it doesn't bring people in, it pushes people away. So again, when we look at government strategies, we can have a long conversation about how important those government strategies are to shape what institutions and what academics do, because we can probably say that they're not very important. But anyway, they shape government understandings and they shape funding as well. Government strategies generally focus on international education and on students and on the mobility of students. That's what they generally focus on. Some of them have a broader aspect, but many of them have a commercial and an economic focus because they're strategies. And yet institutions themselves generally focus on internationalisation or global engagement. They have a broader understanding. So there's a mismatch there. And again, you look at what international offices focus on campuses. International offices generally work on defined international programs, and those programs are generally student related. That's certainly the case with my office. The vast majority of the programs that we work on for the university are in relation to students, not in relation to staff, not in relation to our outreach activities, not in relation to our research. Those things are equally important for any university in terms of its international agenda, but they're not things that can be tasked as easily to a particular group of students. So again, I think it's important that as scholars and as practitioners, we reflect on what we do and why we do it, and the fact that we, again, I see internationalisation as a whole of institution endeavour. It's not something that one office can do. One office can do a number of things and can help people to think about it, but everybody is doing internationalisation or global engagement. And how do we make sure that everybody understands that? I think that's a really hard thing.
And appreciate what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of talk about staff development for internationalisation. I'm guilty of the same thing myself, and making sure that people are offered, whether it's a training program or whether it's something that that they can get interested in or whatever. But again, it's our interpretation of what we mean by internationalisation, isn't it? And maybe forcing that interpretation on the faculty, as it were.
We've had reflections as well about whether we should have a Global Engagement Award each year. We have Teaching and Learning Awards. We recognise research excellence in different ways, but we don't have a Global Engagement Award. And again, we've thought about it, but what are you going to do? You're going to recognise one or two people. Is that really going to change behaviour on campus? We've just launched at UCD a global engagement seed fund. It's a small pot of money, but again, that's been really useful because it has actually attracted people to really think about how they might take a really small pot of money to do something different and move something forwards. And we had a wonderful set of applications there. So again, trying to think about the best way to reach all of the corners of a large institution. That's our challenge. And really, one of the recommendations that I made in my PhD research was that actually we needed to think about disciplinary leadership of internationalisation. tend to have a structural leadership. We have within UCD, we have vice principals for internationalisation in each of our 6 colleges. At my prior institution, it was associate deans international in each of the faculties. We tend to have a structural approach. Whereas actually, I think we probably need to have leadership at the disciplinary level. So within a discipline, because so much of this is focused on the nature of the discipline. Now, again, that's not something that most institutions can do. It happens informally. You know, you find laboratory leaders in a particular discipline who are very internationally engaged, and everybody in their laboratory is then internationally engaged because it's the norm. It's the norm in that environment.
Yeah.
So it's how do we actually seed that across all of the other parts of the university? That's hard to work out.
Yeah, and of course that's also part of Betty Lesk's model in terms of internationalising the curriculum. But I remember my most recent visit to UCD when you'd sought out some of these initiatives that were happening across the institution, and it was just amazing to see what was going on. But so congratulations and continue the good work. But it's great to talk to you today, Douglas, and you know,
Wonderful.
we could go on for hours as we usually do, but anyway, I think we'll stop it there. But thanks very much for today.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. It's wonderful to speak to you.
Yeah.